Welcome, ladies, gentlemen, distinguished guests. Um, my name is Ido Leidner. I'm a BA/MA student here at SIS, and for the last 4 years, I've had the privilege of having American University's very own Professor Amitav Acharya as a form of informal mentor and scholarly role model to look up to while I'm here. I am honored to welcome you to the launch of The Once and Future World Order, a compelling exploration of non-Western civilizational origins of today's world order that in these tumultuous times feels very incredibly timely and important. I can speak about the importance of this book firsthand because, to put it simply, I was there when it was born. A week into my freshman year, I attended Amitav's first year seminar, which also served as the trial run for this book and its accessibility to a broader audience. And I was told, as a fresh scholar in international relations, that we haven't really learned the full picture of what world order is. Initially, that idea felt almost foreign to me, but I was fascinated and captivated almost instantly. When he looked up for volunteers to review some draft chapters, it seemed like a no-brainer to volunteer. Since that class, the book and its complex world order have accompanied me to every course at American University, practically glued to my hip. But I've come to realize during these 4 years studying international relations that this is the field where speaking the same language is nearly impossible. And this is why Amitav's book is so important. It offers international relations scholars, especially young IR professionals that are just starting out, a rare geopolitical perspective, a holistic view of the past, and a more reassuring view of the future. With this newest addition to Amitav's growing family of important intellectual conversations taking its very first steps today, its message of transforming fear of decline into hope for the future is more needed than ever. But I do hope that just as I enjoyed Acharya's civilizational inquiries then and now, that you will too. I want to welcome Dr. Shannon Hayter, Dean of American University's School of International Service, to say a few opening remarks.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I will really be a few remarks. It's my job just to welcome you all here to the School of International Service and to say it is such a thrill to have our very first book launch of the year be Dr. Amitav's book. It's an exciting way to launch our year, and it is such an important book. As Ido said, The Once and Future World Order, Why Global Civilization Will Survive the Decline of the West. Wonderful to hear how it was born or introduced and worked through first-year seminars, as well as, I think, some of the greatest walls of power and exchange of other scholars and other archives, I would say. It's certainly already getting attention with reviews in the New York Times, the Christian Science Monitor, the International Relations, and more. And I think it's fair to say, Amitav, you have impeccable timing. I can't imagine a time when there are more people to get engaged and interested and be thoughtful about this topic that maybe even a year ago weren't. As we see some of the unpredictability of how U.S. leadership is showing up in the world, and it can be an opportunity for all of us to widen our lens and learn to look at things from multiple different perspectives. And so congratulations on the timing of the culmination of your many years that went into this book. You will get full introductions to our illustrious author and panelists after me, but I just wanted to highlight a couple of things because I think they're part of what makes being here at SIS really special. Many of you know we have a long-standing history that really puts together the best commitment to scholarship with the translation to policy and practice. So pulling those things together, and that's why we're called the School of International Service. But we also have this wonderful embodiment and commitment of linking our scholarship and our students. And so Thank you and congratulations for Amitav for demonstrating that in today's event, as you will meet several of his students as part of the program. And so maybe I'll just start by saying, thank you to our SIS seniors, Ida Liedner, Emma Pohl, and Marissa McBurney for participating and preparing and co-hosting today's event. Amitav has in the past won AU's Teacher Scholar of the Year award, and so really is another example of an award's not just a one-time thing, but it's a recognition of a way of practice and a way of engagement in our community. Thank you so much for Emma Vitale and our Office of Research for organizing today's event, and for Alice for being here to help with the logistics and getting it going. And with that, I am going to hand over to Emma for introduction of our panelists. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Before we begin the discussion, I want to take a moment to introduce our distinguished speakers today. Amitav Acharya is the UNESCO Chair in Transnational Challenges and Governance and Distinguished Professor at American University's School of International Service, as well as a professor who I truly admire and look up to. His books include The Once and Future World Order, Why Global Civilization Will Survive the Decline of the West, The Making of Global International Relations, Constructing Global Order, and other landmark works. In 2020, he received American University's highest honor, Scholar Teacher of the Year Award. Ravi Agrawal is the editor-in-chief of Foreign Policy. He's also the host of Foreign Policy Live, the magazine's video channel and podcast, on which he regularly interviews world leaders and policymakers. He's shared a Peabody Award and 3 Emmy nominations for his work as a TV producer, and his writing for Foreign Policy was part of a series nominated for a 2020 National Magazine Award for columns and commentary. Akbar Ahmed is the Ibn Khaldun Chair of Islamic Studies and a distinguished professor in the School of International Service at American University and a Global Fellow of the Wilson Center. Ahmed's career has included distinguished posts in both academia and public service. Now, I would like to invite Professor Acharya to the stage to introduce this exciting new work.
Thank you very much, all of you. Dean Shannon, of course, Ido, and Emma, and Marissa, of course, the other Emma, who is from SIS Research, which organized this whole thing. We have a great research department in the school that helps to organize these book launches. So thank you. And Simon Nicholson, who may not be here, but thank you very much. I also want to introduce my student, Muhammad Uthman, who is actually sitting there. He's doing a PhD, but helped a lot with the research for this book. Muhammad, thank you. And of course, I'd like to thank, it'll take me 10 minutes to thank everybody. Akbar Ahmed has been indispensable for this book. One of the most important things you do when you write a trade book is to find an agent. And he's the one who connected me to my agent. Thank you so much, Akbar. Because I failed a few times because people don't, and academics, the New York agents don't care about academics very much because we're too academic for them. So thank you, Akbar. And Ravi Agrawal, lest we think this is a book for students and a good way textbook, I thought he will tell you that this is not just for academic text for our first-year seminar students, which is where it came out of, but it's actually for policymakers. And thank you very much. He's extremely busy, and thank you for making time to come here. And of course, to the School of International Service, SIS, the book was born here, and at the time I started teaching, this room just had been created. Teaching meaning I've been teaching here for 17 years, but this room has been here for like 14 years of this. And ex-dean, former dean Lou Goodman, who hired me here, and he's sitting somewhere in the back. Thank you very much for all of you. This is like home, and in my book, if you read the acknowledgement, you'll find a little section, what an important role School of International Service and AU has played in this room. So I say that I am in Washington, but I'm not of Washington, maybe except for people like Ravi. But most of the mainstream thinking in Washington, D.C. is very different from what I'm talking about. And I don't really know. No criticism of other schools in Washington, but I don't know that I could have written this book. I had this kind of incentive, a mental framework, if I was a little further downtown, right? Being in the corner, northwest corner, in kind of a little thinking space here for a progressive, well, I don't know whether you call it progressive, but at least open thinking, opening up is possible only because of being here. I really don't know that's a good or a bad thing in the political climate today. I hope it doesn't bring any disrepute or hostility to the school from certain sections, but I'm happy to be able to do that, and thank you very much for SIS for being my home for 17 years, the longest I've spent in any university in my life. Okay, so this is the book. I will come back to this. You can see one thing, that all regions, civilizations are covered. Maybe not South Pacific, but there is a section on South Pacific. But it's also not just about the big name civilizations like India, China, or Rome, or Greece. It also covers Africa and the Americas before the so-called Columbian voyages, and of course ends up with again, United States city up on the hill and the rise or return of the rest. Okay, so it's comprehensive. It's 5,000 years, and it looks at the origins and evolution of world order, how the foundational ideas of world order came about. So what is this book about? It's mostly historical. I know a lot of the questions you may have, a lot of the questions I get. I mean, I was just in New York a couple of days ago to launch this book, and at a UN side event, and everybody said, oh, what's Mr. T going to do to world order, or what's happening to US-China relations, right? I said, look, most of the book is, there's only about 10% of the book which is contemporary, 20th century. Okay, it starts 5,000 years ago from the Sumerians and the Egyptians, and goes through Persia and Babylon, and goes through China, India, Islam, and Africa, Americas, and Europe and the like. But I'm happy to take questions. Yesterday I was at the UN again, and we talked about this book, and to a bunch of about 20 ambassadors to the UN from various countries, including the Pakistani and the Indian ambassador to the permanent mission. And again, a lot of the discussion, no matter how much I say, they will come back to the present. So that's why I think Ravi is here. It's such a nice thing. He can make sense of how the book, he has already helped me to make sense of it in an article in Foreign Policy magazine, but maybe he can tell a little bit more about it. And this is then also not about predicting the future, mostly about the past, and I don't believe history repeats itself, but history can suggest possibilities of how we can frame, organize, rebuild world order, because there is a range of possibilities. The current world order we have is a blip in the history of 5,000 years of world. The Western dominance is just a little blip, whether you call it 200 years or 500 years. We have 5,000 years, not 500 years. And therefore, this can tell you, during that time, many civilizations have risen and fallen, contributed ideas, and also showed that the different ways, diverse ways in which world order can be built. And that's what is the message of the book. So it's published by a trade publisher. It's a little bit very different world, very different from Cambridge, Oxford, Cornell, the usual publishers that I have published with. So they have very demanding, well, they want to make money, right? They want to sell books, and they want you to refine, edit, simplify as much as possible. But this particular publisher let me actually keep the academic content also. So things like, I asked students here, Westphalia, Westphalian sovereignty. My editor said, what's Westphalia? Okay, so explain, two lines in our footnote there. So the balance of power, we take it for granted. Well, hegemony, we think we know, but most of the people that are intended to read this book for the publisher's point of view, trade publishers, they don't know, don't assume anything. So that's why it's 424 pages, 474 pages, or 64. It could have been 300 probably. But some repetition, but again, it's all by design, not by accident. I had to rewrite this book for 1 year after having written it in 4 years. Okay, Key arguments: creating world order, ensuring stability and dispelling chaos. This is order versus chaos is a very Egyptian thing. Started 3,000 years ago from Pharaoh Narmer, so Muhammad would know, and it's Isfet and Maat. And the idea that order depends on stability, depends on dispelling chaos, and creating order and justice is a long-running theme in history. It's reproduced from Egypt to India to Islam to China to Persia to Europe and to the contemporary United States. When the American presidents talk about chaos, okay, order. We have the mission, liberal order, to establish stability and order. Woodrow Wilson said that. Roosevelt said that. Barack Obama said that. I don't know what the current leader thinks of, but I think that's a separate thing. But the key point is, where does order come from? And this is probably, in one sentence, the theme of the book, that it is not a monopoly. It's a shared creation. Now, created through separate but similar innovations by multiple civilizations, and sometimes, but not always, through diffusion. So if you pay attention to that, you get the message of the book. So what does shared creation mean? It's not a feel-good word. It's actually the essence of the methodology of the book. So that's the second point. The core ideas and mechanisms of world order defined very broadly. Independence of states. We call it sovereignty, territorial integrity. The first territorial boundary marker was done in 2500 BC between Umma and Lagash. Independent state system originated with Sumer. Now we can call it in modern terms, but the basic idea is that states should be independent and can constitute a system or an order as opposed to becoming a part of an empire. Empire is also very important, by the way. A lot of the book is about empire. That's a form of world order, and still we live on the legacy of empire. But still, the idea that with the modern world order is Westphalian. No. The idea of the independence of states is not Westphalian, European. It started, I think, in the Sumerian city-states. Before the Greeks picked it up, Indians had republican states before the First Empire. The Chinese, in some ways, not republican, but had warring states. So you can have an international system. Warring states were not always warring. They're actually communicating a lot. You have Mayas had an independent state system. So looking very fundamentally, you'll find ideas are very similar, but they're not necessarily created through diffusion. They are created through independent innovation too. Not everything is diffusion. If you think everything is diffusion, then that's another problem there. So who is the creator, who is a student? I find many examples of independent but parallel creation of similar, if not the same ideas, because human beings tend to provide similar solutions to similar problems. Problems of anarchy, problems of power, problems of development, ecological collapse, or threats. So we end up having a lot of similarities. And that's the book's purpose, is to tease out these creation, parallel, independent, also through diffusion, the creation of world order. And that doesn't include just independence of states. Diplomacy, peace treaties, economic interdependence. Again, I'm using a very modern term, but long-distance trade. The idea that states depend on each other economically and cannot do without it. Nobody can be completely autarkic. There have been moments of like that, but most of history, there is interdependence. Depends on the extent or scope, but it's not something that was created after World War II or the like. Humanitarian values, including proto-human rights, and human rights and democracy are basically 20th century creations. But before that, we had also ideas about democracy and human rights. Humanitarian values, just war principles, not killing civilians during war, or combatants have laid down their weapons. You can find very striking parallels between the Geneva Convention and the Code of Manu, for example, in India, and also racial, religious tolerance, and much more. That we find that they came from multiple places, sometimes independently, sometimes through diffusion. The West, a very problematic term here. I will end up by saying something about it. Borrowed and benefited from some of them to fuel its rise. Now, this is something people have already looked at. I'm not the first one, but I find a lot more evidence of Western borrowing of the ideas of the rest, from not only from the well-known civilizations of China, India, or Islam, but also from Africa and from the Americas. And the decline, this is probably the most controversial point. This is why Wall Street Journal attacked me. I said Western dominance need not be a bad thing. They, of course, twisted it in the long run, but an opportunity to build a more inclusive world with more ideas and pathways to stability. The couple of things, I'll come back to this. I'm talking about decline of Western dominance, not decline of the West, not decline of Western civilization. No, the dominance of the West. And I'm saying it need not be a bad thing in the long run. I'm not saying it's not going to create some conflicts and problems. So, but people, of course, misunderstand this, especially if they want to. That means I'm saying, oh, decline of America is a good thing. I mean, for some people it may be, but that's not the purpose of this book. The Western dominance, the kind of dominance it has for the last 300 to 500 years, is actually a good thing. And I will defend that argument. Okay, so very quickly, just take half a minute to look at some of these ideas. I'll give some examples. I don't have time for it. That where some of these ideas came from: independence of states, great power cooperation, just war principles, right to life and property. Mali's Manden Charter is one of the origins, or Kuruk and Fuga, decentralized empire, competitive public service exams, which is China's biggest contribution to world order, not gunpowder, paper, or printing, and which Americans adopted. Here, long-distance trade and connectivity. Some of this you can say parallel independent creation. On the right side, you think there is diffusion. So that includes competitive public service. You can call it civil service. The Chinese call it public service. Long-distance trade, rational mode of thinking, Islamic philosophy from Baghdad to Cordoba, basically a major factor behind European Enlightenment. Of course, we're the world-famous expert on this, Akbar. He can talk a little bit about it. And of course, right here, where we live, Iroquois Confederacy, or some people call it Iroquois, might have influenced the United States, at least presented a very authentic model of interstate cooperation that inspired at least some of the founders, including Benjamin Franklin. Okay, so start with multipolar stability. We think multipolarity can be really bad, but there have been two examples in the history that I can talk about in this book, I do talk about, where multipolarity is well managed. And we know the European concert system as a multipolar system that had cooperation among the great powers. After the defeat of Napoleon in 1814, and the concert started, Congress of Vienna, 1815. But we had more than 1,500 years before that, the Amarna system, we call it a metaphor for the relation between Egypt and its neighbors. And you find that 5 great powers of the middle, what we call the Near East, the term did not exist, Egypt, Hatti, and of course, Mitanni, and Assyria and Babylon. They actually maintained peace 200 years. Not the European concept founded in 50 years, between 1815 and the Crimean War, 1853, 1856, and then collapsed, led to World War I in 1914. This concept system actually, great power cooperation diplomacy, maintained peace, no war among the major powers for 200 years. Okay, we discussed that in the book. Peacemaking, where did the first peace treaty come from? Egyptian Hittite peace treaty. I was talking to a bunch of UN ambassadors about this. Actually, there is a plaque replica of this right in the UN, at the entrance of the UN. People miss that. The first treaty was actually that we know of. We have documents. And Egyptian Hittite peace treaty, 1259. To cut a long story short, those are the 2 major powers that stood out above everybody else, and this was slightly after the Amarna system. They fought a war to a standstill. Each side claimed victory, as the countries do this time, and they signed a treaty. Now, what is important about this treaty, it had non-aggression, like one country, Egypt should not attack Hatti, Hatti should not attack Egypt. They had alliances, they have even extradition. If the enemy of one regime or state escapes to another state, well, Egypt's enemy of the Pharaoh of Egypt goes to the king of Hatti's territory, the king of Hatti will just simply return extradition, which is a very modern principle today we have, and vice versa. These are all reciprocal. What is really striking, by the way, there are 2 versions of this treaty, the Egyptian version and the Hittite version. The Hittite version, you find that identical. There's no hanky-panky with the translation. It's faithful. Both translations are exactly the same. So it's not like each side claimed victory, but they actually faithfully translated and kept the provisions exactly the same. Right, so this is kind of very important, the modern UN Charter or ancient NATO, whatever you call it. Economic openness, big debate about free trade. We often credit it to Hugo Grotius. To cut a long story short, Grotius was in the payroll of the Dutch East India Company, and his cousin actually was the captain of a warship that sank a Portuguese ship, an act of piracy, looted it, took it to Amsterdam, sold the goods, and the Dutch East India Company hired Hugo Grotius as a lawyer to write a legal brief, and the first chapter of that became Mare Liberum. Now, the moral of the story is that both Grotius and his cousin, the captain of the warship that sank this Portuguese merchant ship off Singapore in 1603, they're on the payrolls of a colonial company, basically Dutch East India Company, VOC. Now, two things here. Where did the idea, Grotius basically argued that the Portuguese should not be preventing the Dutch from trading in the Indian Ocean. The book actually is called, where Mare Liberum comes from, it's actually called The Right of the Dutch to Trade in the Indies. It's not called global maritime security or freedom of the seas. It's the Dutch have a right to trade in the Indian Ocean, and the Portuguese are harassing them. So they shouldn't do this. We sank their ship because sea is common to all. Where did this idea come from? It existed for 1,000 years in the Indian Ocean. And in the Indian Ocean, which linked up, I'll talk about in a moment, from Africa, the current Middle East, to Southeast Asia through India, was always a Mare Liberum. Anybody could trade if you pay port duties. It doesn't depend on nationality, it doesn't depend on citizenship. So he was provided documents about the Indian Ocean, that's Grotius, by the East India Company, the Dutch East India Company, so that he can make that argument. Of course, the European scholars, Eurocentric scholars rather, say that Grotius got this idea from the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, from European legal thinkers. No, there was a tradition, unless he just want to not admit it. I have evidence that he had documents. The Dutch had a treaty with the Sultan of Johor, and they jointly wanted to defend themselves against the Portuguese. So it's impossible that Grotius did not know about. He wrote a book about the Indies. He wrote a book about Dutch had an alliance with the Malays. And of course, he was talking about a ship that sank off Singapore to make the argument that sea is open. So he would have got this idea. Of course, the irony of this is not only that Grotius, the founder of modern liberalism, a liberal order, was not only defended a colonial company, but that company went on to establish a much bigger monopoly than the Portuguese could ever do. They also harassed, and they said to the Sultan of like Makassar, Malacca, you can't trade with each other anymore. You trade through us, and we'll give you a cut. So when he did that to the Sultan of Makassar in the 17th century, the Sultan said, God made the land and the land he divided among men, and the sea he gave in common. It has never been heard that anyone should be forbidden to sell the seas. Now, that's basically the Indian Ocean tradition. That's the freedom of seas. And here you go. Another very important point, I mentioned this in the article for foreign policy as well. Who controlled this trade? Not India, not China, no big empire controlled it. It was the small states, port city states, Kilwa, Zanzibar, Mombasa, Malindi, Mogadishu, Aden, Hormuz, Calicut, Masuliputam, Tamralipti, which kind of straddles between where I grew up and where Avi grew up, Bengal and Odisha, and then Malacca. Small states managed free trade. You don't need a hegemon like Britain and the United States. This has been the ancient tradition for thousands of years in the Indian Ocean. And this was the most prosperous oceanic trading system in the world before the transatlantic and trans-Pacific trade were even started. And it was prosperous because that's the reason why the Portuguese came to Malacca, conquered it, and one of the Portuguese explorers said, whoever controls Malacca has his hand in the throat of Venice. So if you control Malacca, we'll kill off Venice, because Portuguese and Venice were rivals. Right. Rational mode of thinking. We go to rational thinking, philosophy. Now, of course, we think of the Greeks, but actually India had a much richer tradition of philosophy during the Vedic period. But let's say the Greeks. Greeks certainly were outstanding. But what got the Greek philosophy to pass to the West? Okay, here is an example. Philosophy is about questioning, right? Questioning long-standing assumptions, finding cause and effect. So the prevailing wisdom in the Christian Catholic under papacy was that God created everything. God created the universe in a single act. The Genesis, I think, Bible, Genesis tells you. God created everything in a single act out of nothing, okay? So let there be light, and there was light. Now, the Greeks had challenged that, especially Aristotle, but that knowledge had basically sunk after the fall of Greek Empire under the Roman. The Byzantine Empire basically destroyed the school of Athens, where Academy of Athens, where Plato and Aristotle taught. So who preserved this knowledge? Not only preserved, but enhanced. It was the Caliphate in Baghdad, then the Caliphate in Cordoba, and then a guy, particularly Ibn Rushd. Again, I refer to Akbar on expertise on this, but I have spent a lot of time and visited Al-Andalus and studied this myself. And it's really astounding that Ibn Rushd wrote about 36 or 37 commentaries on Aristotle. At a time, some of the Aristotelian knowledge was not available because the Greek texts had disappeared. So Aristotle's metaphysics went to Europe through Arabic translation. There was no Greek translation, a Greek text available. They found one later, but by that time, the Renaissance already started. When the professors, the philosophers in Bologna, Paris, Oxford, the three major universities in the beginning, are looking for a way to challenge the papacy, which was at their throat, basically, but saying that God did not create the universe. Actually, the natural forces created it. They got inspiration from Ibn Rushd, and they sometimes call him the Arab Aristotle. I think this is slightly insulting. But on the other hand, he is given a place of honor in the pantheon of philosophy, although most of us don't know about it. So how many of you actually have read Ibn Rushd? And because of that, his idea of the eternity of the world is a foremost example of a rational mode of thinking, that the universe creation is not by God, but by natural forces. Now, that's where natural philosophy starts. And this idea was significantly revived and enhanced by Islamic thinkers. But this is what the Islamic thinking did. I'm giving you only a sampling of the text. So first, they translated from Greece, India, China, Persia, texts, and of course Egypt, into Arabic, preserved it in Baghdad. Then when the Umayyad Caliphate basically moved to Cordoba, there was a retranslation process. And the retranslation was from Arabic back to not Greek, but medieval French and Latin and the sort of Middle English. And that's how the knowledge spread. A very striking path of diffusion here. And you can see the Indian texts, like Zero playing a very important role, medical texts of Ptolemy, of course, Aristotle's own work, Canon of Medicine of Ibn Sina, just to give you a small example. There are hundreds and hundreds of these texts, but these are some of the most important examples. So without the 12th century rationalist, whose defense of Aristotelian philosophy against Orthodox theologians, the Enlightenment might not have happened. You might laugh at it, but argue with me, argue with Akbar. We will defend this proposition because we've studied the diffusion. I have got even a chart that shows exactly, not in the book, but certainly in my class I've shown this. Okay, finally, last 2 points probably. Property rights. We think of Magna Carta as giving property rights the basis of human rights, by the way, in many ways. So Magna Carta, King John coerced into signing a document, otherwise we'll kill you, in the early 13th century, and talked about king has no right to take away your property. Property can be only transferred through payment or inheritance or something like that. The Mandan Charter, Kuruk and Fuga of Mali, at about the same time, said pretty much the same thing, that there are 5 ways to acquire property: buying, donation, exchange, work, and inheriting. Any other form without convincing testimony is doubtful. Now, apart from right to life, by the way, everyone has a right to life. Every life is a life. That was the saying. So why is this important? The Magna Carta was nullified by the Pope as null and void about a few days later, because it was coerced out of King John, who was a disciple of the Pope. Now, it had to revive several times. It did not benefit the peasants. It only benefited the nobility. In fact, led to greater exploitation of the peasants. The nobility now can say, we have property rights, so we just marginalize you and exploit you further. The Kuruk and Fuga was applied to everybody, not just to the nobility, anybody who had property in the Malian empire at that time. And so it is much more egalitarian, just way of property rights than the property rights we see in Europe or in the United States, basically inherited the European property rights system. And Iroquois and the United States, I mentioned this, there is a lot of controversy about it. The Iroquois had this confederation going on for 500 years. The European settlers saw it. Benjamin Franklin translated the treaties, and he, at the Constitutional Convention, Philadelphia, is one of the founders of the United States Constitution, drafters. He was exhorting his colleagues that if we call them 5 ignorant savages, of course that was the prevailing term of endearment, right? If you like the Indians, we call them savage and ignorant. But he said, if they can do it, why can't the 13 colonies do it? And the US Congress has recognized it in one of its moments of great wisdom back in the 80s, but historians can dispute it. My argument is that even if the US did not borrow it, although we see a path of diffusion right here, the fact is that when the European settlers came in North America, there was a very successful confederation lasting 500 years. And why isn't that an example? So whether you call it diffusion or independent creation, it matters. It's the foundation of world order. And another thing is that Iroquois actually were the first to recognize the United States of America. Had the Iroquois joined the French, the British against the French, we may not have a United States, because they supported George Washington and the independence army against the British. So the British were, of course, in Canada, and they were trying to, well, the Americans were fighting the British at that time. And civil service. Well, this is a complex, convoluted statement, partly because the US Civil Service Commission in 1874 refused to acknowledge directly that China is actually a very superior civilization. And you can say that, that Confucius had taught political morality. The people of China had read books and used the compass, gunpowder, and multiplication table during centuries when this continent was a wilderness. Now, this is a very clear case of diffusion. There's a lot more to it. The Chinese civil service system were taken by Jesuits to France and by East India Company to Britain, and they started having public service. Instead of hiring people based on nobility, birth, just get another, basically a son, male from another noble and lord, and make him a minister. The French revolutionaries wanted to overthrow the ancient regime. They wanted to democratize French society. So the old system doesn't help them because you reproduce the same people. So when the Jesuits brought in these texts and the traditions from China, so people like Voltaire said, oh, this Montesquieu, this is great. We can actually destroy the foundation of the ancient regime, feudalism, and by having public service recruitment through open competitive examination, which China basically invented. And the Americans thought if the British did it, why can't we do it? Because they're reluctant to say that China is with any intention, with no intention of commending either the religion or imperialism China, fair enough. But we could not ignore the fact that the most enlightened and enduring government of the Eastern world, probably most of the world, had required an examination as to the merits of candidates rather than just recruiting them. And if you do further research, Before that period, and even before World War II, World War I, most of the civil service recruitment is basically patronage. You call spoil system, right? The president gets elected, appoints his own people. The system still survives, by the way. But the civil service system, exam system, which the Americans would not, the way that justified it is that if the British could do it, why can't we? The British borrowed the Chinese, we could also do that. They will not acknowledge the Chinese, we can directly borrow from the Chinese, because we borrowed so many things from the British. Democracy, constitutional system, rights, so borrow another thing. The British have got it from China, so it's okay. That's how they justified, because this commission was highly politicized and facing a lot of fights inside the Congress. So they justified it. And the spoil system still exists. We still have presidents appointing their children and their friends and the sycophants into very powerful positions. But 60% of the US civil service after in 1914 had been recruited through open competitive exams. Right, so here you go. Does the past matter? Why am I talking about 5,000 years, 3,000 years, 1,000 years? How is that relevant to us? Well, think of the difference between customary law and legal codes, or written constitutions. But let me just tell you this. So you know, some of you might know political scientist Robert Dahl, who said, to deny that Athens was a democracy would be rather like saying that what the Wright brothers invented was not an airplane, because their early machine, the Wright Flyer, so little resembled what it is today. So the Wright Flyer is nothing like Singapore Airlines, but it's a great way to fly those days, by the way. And so is Singapore Airlines. So if Athenian democracy, the purpose of Athenian democracy, it was democracy without civil liberties, individual liberties. It was basically the liberty. When Greeks talk about liberty, liberty of the polis, Athens versus Sparta, Athens and Sparta versus Persia, if individuals started questioning the state, there was no freedom of speech. Otherwise, you'll end up like Socrates, drink poison, commit suicide, ostracize, go to the Persian Empire. Most of them went to the Persian Empire. And so, but we still give them credit for inventing democracy. I have absolutely no problem if somebody told me Athenians invented democracy. Only 13.7% people could vote, by the way. You have to be male, military service, you have to have done military service, and you have to, of course, slaves and foreigners had no right. So I calculated from Brodel, 12.7% could vote in the greater Athens area. Still a democracy. Limited franchise, no individual liberty, but still democracy. If we apply that standard, why don't we apply the same standard to this, Iroquois? You can say that these are all primitive examples, or even this. Now, these are also foundations of world order. They were created in imperfect forms, maybe sometimes perfect forms. I didn't show you the Indian Code of Manu. It's actually more perfect of that period. More injunctions and the Geneva Conventions. And they were observed, not because not killing civilians in combat, or not having collateral damage, not using poisonous weapons, not harming a soldier that has surrendered. Now, these are actually observed. Why? Not because Indians are peace-loving people. Nobody is peace-loving and nobody is warmonger purely. Because there was so much violence in ancient India that the leaders and philosophers thought of a way to limit the scope of violence. And these principles, just like Geneva Conventions, will limit violence, not abolish war. So there is no injunction against these things, but say that we have so much violence in ancient India that otherwise the whole society will collapse. Okay. Lessons of history, New York Times, not because why we derive. They called it a reason to be optimistic. That was not my title. Paper, the original title for first 7 minutes was Who is Afraid of a Post-American World? I like that. Newspapers, like Ravi might know, they give 2 titles, and they change it within 5 minutes, getting the initial reaction. So the first reaction, I have a copy of that screenshot, was basically the editor had warned me, I like that, who is afraid of the post-American world? But then it seems like at that time, an optimistic message will sound good, given all this catastrophe that's happening here. And New York Times, I'm talking about all the kind of, turmoil from January 20th onwards. And they thought it would be good to have a message of hope. And this is kind of good and bad, because I think I always get asked this question, why are you so optimistic? Because New York Times has called you. I've never used the term optimism in my book. But on the other hand, it's good because it stands out. It stands out from the pessimism. I'll talk about it. Okay, so I'm actually running out of time. So let me go tell you why I wrote this book. So in 2014, when I started teaching this class in SIS, there was a leading textbook that just come out, Henry Kissinger. And I used that as a text. I still use it for a different purpose. So look at the chapter. This is the best-selling book, still is, on world order. First chapter, Europe, Westphalia. Second chapter, Europe, Council of Europe. Third chapter, Islam, a world in disorder, very well-chosen title. Then China, India gets a little section. Out of Asia, China gets a little section. And then we all end up coming to the United States, acting for all mankind. Now, I thought, this is good. I went to the book launch. I got 2 copies of the book signed by Mr. Kissinger. I have been a picture of him. But I thought I cannot give it to my students just like that. They should read it, but they need an alternative text too. And this is why this came out. So Kissinger doesn't talk about race, doesn't talk about Africa, doesn't talk about the Inca, Iroquois, but these are part of, but he claims to have also a 5,000 years of history. He actually goes back to ancient China and India as well, deriving cultural traits from these ancient civilizations. Okay, so you can read this and ask me, decline of Western dominance good? I think if you call it decline dominance, then it's good. I am not talking about decline of Western civilization or decline of them per se. The rest has been a creator. We have evidence the rest has been a creator. Global South, today we call it, has been a creator. And now also we have material reconvergence, not just ideational, the role of innovation and creation. There's a level playing field once you get the sense of level playing field once you go through this. But also materially, countries are catching up. China, India, and Global South. So it's time to think about a new kind of a global order or world order that's not Western dominated, that's consistent with the changing trends, the realities of the world politics. But I think we need to also have mutual kind of a compromise here. The West should accept, not deny. There are a lot of Western scholars that still claim denying the imperialism. They come and say, oh, it was bad, but not that bad. I mean, we did a lot of good things. You have to really clear and simple, because that creates mistrust and suspicion in the minds of Global South. I also tell the Global South not to blame everything on colonialism. A lot of the blame has to be also on you, how you managed. The difference between Singapore and Philippines is that 2 different leaders led the country. Philippines was richer than Singapore in 1950s. So you have to have that kind of agency. So the outcome not be global multiplex or global, so it would be a global multiplex, not a paradise or Eden. Wall Street Journal falsely claimed that I have called for a global Eden. The term doesn't exist. I actually said it will be more inclusive, not necessarily more peaceful. And it might lead to new pathways of peace and stability. So this is the article I did for Ravi Foreign Policy Magazine. This basically tells you how you can use this for modern policy debates, contemporary policy debates. And I'm happy to say that AI has put my book into one of the, when you did a search, best books on the world order. Now, the moral of the story is that when you look for impact, don't go by New York Times best-selling list. Don't go by Google Scholar. That will take time for this to reflect. You can do a bigger search. And I know sometimes it's problematic, but I did multiple searches and multiple phrases, and this seems to be making an impact. So thank you very much. Sorry I've taken so much time.
Thank you so much, Amitav. I would now love to welcome our 3 panelists to join us for a little fireside chat of approximately 15 minutes or so before we open the floor to Q&A. So Amitav, Ravi, Akbar, we welcome you to the floor.
Okay, I think I've been volunteered to go first here. I'll just be very, very short because I'm far more interested in listening to the rest of you and turn this into an interactive session. First of all, it's an honor to be here with all of you at this school, to be on this stage of sorts with Amitav and Akbar. I've admired their work for many, many years. I've read the book. I think it's fantastic. In my mind, I think of this book as a well, actually book. And I just want to say a few words about why this book is so important right now. You know, the general framing and the feeling and the mood globally right now is one of anxiety for a number of reasons. And depending on who you are, where you live, there are different sources of anxiety. I have often found that the best way to deal with making sense of this moment is two things. One is the global comparative, and the other is the historical comparative. Those two axes, history and the rest of the world, is incredibly useful to me in finding a sense of calm, peace, context, understanding. And I think Amitav's book does that really, really well. The other reason why it's very important, I think, is, look, the truth is we are in a moment of immense flux. There are several reasons for that flux. But in short, you know, one is that the world order as we know it, created in some senses 80 years ago. I mean, there are many moments which you could declare as the moment that world order was created, but the one that tends to get cited the most these days is the 8-year mark after World War II and the American-led world order with the United Nations and the World Bank and the IMF and the Bretton Woods institutions. And there's a real sense now that that order is fraying in a very visible way. Do rules matter? Is there, you know, can countries just act with impunity? Can they attack another country without consequences? And when you look at the state of the world right now and the multiple conflicts we have going on, there's a real sense that rules don't matter. There are no consequences. And that leads to a slippery slope, which other countries can then exploit. Linked to that is, I don't like the word decline when it comes to America because jury's out. But relative decline is a clear thing we can agree on, which is not just in America's hands, but is also linked to the rise of other countries. So if you look at the world from that lens, where China's incredible rise over the last 3 or 4 decades and the rise of other big economies, think of India, Nigeria, countries with big populations, as their economies take off, as they become bigger players, bigger stakeholders in what we call world order, there are challengers. There are, you know, newcomers who will feel that we don't have to listen to the way things were. We have our own point of view, and now we have some more strength to be able to vocalize that point of view. In that context, and then finally there is Mr. T, as you put it, you know, not to turn this into a political session, but look, Trump is a real challenge to order as we know it. No matter what your politics are, he is unpredictable and, you know, has certainly ruptured global trade. If you think about the tariffs, for example, is certainly making everyone rethink alliances. And I see that as an accelerant in a process that was already underway for many years. I don't think challenges to world order began with Trump. They've been around for a while. I say all of this as the backdrop because what I love about Amitav's book is that when I call it a well, actually book, this is what it is attacking. It is attacking this sense that, oh my gosh, everything we've had for the last 80 years, it will disappear, and this is a void, this is a vacuum, and that means we're entering an era that is going to be awful. It might be awful. What Amitav's book does is it gives us a semblance of hope, I say, to defend the New York Times' headline, although I think ours was better at foreign policy. But that hope is important because once you internalize the sense that, ideas of, maritime law, or the idea that thou shalt not attack your neighbor, when you internalize that these concepts, they weren't just born in 1945, they weren't just born out of Westphalia, they actually have much deeper organic roots in different types of societies. And the reason why that's so important is it should give you a lot more confidence that we will figure it out. That in this moment of relative chaos, in this moment of, a vacuum, a void, countries will, as they always have, in a civilizational sense, figure out, chart some sort of a path forward. I'm going to stop there, but if you haven't bought the book, please do. It's amazing. Akbar.
It's a great honor to be on this panel. Honor because my friend Amitabh has actually given us a book that to me fulfills the primary purpose of an academy. When Plato created the first academy, the idea was to create a space for thinking, original thinking, provocative thinking. And this is a book, it's a big book, as he pointed out, almost 500 pages. And I have been through it. My wife can testify. That book is full of ideas. It's like crackers from the East. China, India is exploding with ideas. And I was delighted. So, Amitabh, congratulations. And congratulations to the current Dean, Dean Shannon Hader, and to Leo Goodman for being perspicacious, intelligent, and compassionate enough to promote good scholars and good thinking, because we are shrinking as a space in America, and this jewel of American culture, that is the academy, is under threat, is shrinking. And I think that's a tragedy. So in a sense, Amitabh is standing against the tide. My second point is, as Ravi has just pointed out, the world is changing, it's uncertain, it's fearful, and you're seeing it lapping around us. How are we to explain it? You have some major stars on the landscape. You've got Mersheimer from Chicago, you've got Jeffrey Sachs from Columbia. These are individuals who now really become superstars in the category of my friend Ravi, that people turn to them for advice, for understanding of this world. We now have genuinely an American university star to join that firmament of stars. So thank you, Amitabh, for reaching that status. The methodological point I want to make, and as your publishers would have reacted to the use of the word methodologically, that's how you rejected my first manuscript, Amitabh. They don't like words like this. My point is that, and I'm really speaking as a social scientist, working in, and largely in the Muslim world, that you have a population, just think about it, according to the great thinkers of today's world, Amitabh, or our friend Kishore Mehbubani, another great global thinker, the world for the last 2,000 years was dominated by India or China as world civilizations in terms of GDP, land mass, armies, economic wealth. And over the last 200 years, there was colonization, and the world is now receding back to the global south. So whether you call it decline or whether the West is over, there's apocalyptic analyses of the West, the decline, the fall, and so on. The fact is that there is a shift. My question is this, again, methodological. What happens to the Muslim parts of the world that we know? That Amitabh pointed out, the rejuvenating of the world. This whole stretch, North Africa, Middle East, Central Asia. There's an entire world, and it seems to have just fallen through the cracks. Where are the great hegemons, if Mersheimer's 4 hegemons are to be acknowledged, USA, China, Russia, and India as an emerging hegemon? Where's the Muslim hegemon? It doesn't exist. Maybe, and again, it's pure conjecture, I'm on campus, so I have the luxury of thinking and imagining, maybe that first tiny step has been taken by Saudi Arabia and Pakistan in forming this pact recently. May not work, may work. But already we are seeing these forces. For example, Malaysia has joined them. The UAE intends joining them. And very soon you can see Turkey and other countries joining, and you will then very quickly have a landmass, you will have military, you'll have economic strength, and you may have the emergence of a nascent Muslim hegemon. Whether it's a force for good or evil, we don't know. But with the changing of the world order, we need to also take cognizance of this fact that you do have this world order with a new player. My final point is about the word hope. Amitabh hasn't gone out to give a Pollyanna kind of vision that we'll all love each other, we'll all be hopeful. My criticism here for anyone thinking of a new world order is how does it improve on the old world order? The old world order, as we are all aware from the global south, has been, we have constantly criticized it for its lack of compassion, for its lack of humanity, for its promotion and involvement in world wars, particularly recently. This is a constant criticism coming from the global south towards the west. If the world order is to shift, we have to make sure that what is of value, what is of permanence in that world, and I'm, for example, referring to India, ancient India with its concepts of Shanti, peace, ahimsa, non-violence, seva, service. These core values of Hinduism, for example, of Sole Kul, of peace, peace with all, of Islam are not lost in this tidal wave of globalization. If we can maintain those virtues, those values, and encourage them to grow, we will then have done a great service to humanity, not in terms of East and West, but humanity generally, because that is what I think ordinary people, the millions and millions of ordinary anonymous people, whether in India or in the Middle East, are thirsting for and have been waiting for. It's a long, long overdue development, and maybe that will bring some relief to their lives. Otherwise, you see figures that are, on the one hand, very impressive in terms of growth. On the other hand, we know that there are millions of people still living below the poverty line and desperately in need of water and education and the basic amenities of life. So thank you so much, Amitabh. Thank you, Ravi, for being here. And congratulations on this great achievement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Agarwal and Professor Ahmed, for your thought-provoking remarks. Your insights certainly highlight the continued relevance of the concepts and themes presented in the once and future world order and their utility in helping us understand the dynamics of today's global order. As I am also one of Professor Acharya's former students who studied many of the ideas explored in this book my freshman year, it is wonderful not only to see this work to come to fruition, but also to hear other thoughtful scholarly perspectives on its main inquiries and arguments. We will now open the floor to questions from our audience members. This will provide an opportunity for today's attendees to engage further with the specific concepts and key arguments raised in the once and future world order. With this Q&A session, we would like to foster a productive conversation and ensure that many different voices are heard. Therefore, we ask that you keep questions concise and specific so that our panelists can directly address each question meaningfully. If you would like to pose a question, we have 2 microphone stands on either ends of the room. Please make an orderly line behind the microphone. With that, we invite you for your questions for Professor Acharya and our panelists.
Good afternoon, since it's now 12:05. My name is Piper Campbell. I'm a faculty member here at American University and am very pleased and proud to work with Amitav on the ASEAN and Indo-Pacific Studies Initiative. My question, Amitav, is actually related to regionalism, because I know that it is an item that you think about, that you write about, and as you envision this future order, I wonder if you could speak some more about how you see regions of the world. It plays a little bit on Professor Akbar's question as well. But what do you see as the role of regions in this future order?
Thank you, Piper. That's a great question. I mean, all world orders are regional in origin. I mean, there is no such thing as a global world order for much of the history. This is only one point, the only point I agree with Mr. Kissinger. So he said there is no such thing as a global world order. So all world orders are regional. The Roman Empire was regional. The Han Empire was regional. The Maurya Empire was regional. And even the British and the Americans created a global sort of hegemony, we call it. But the British did not control Europe. I mean, it was a balance of power system. Continental Europe was not part of the British world order. China and India were not part of the British world order, or sorry, American world order until recently. India was non-aligned and China was communist. So vast majority of global South actually was non-aligned. So I think the idea of a global world order is a bit of a misnomer. So that's why when I say Chinese world order, Indian world order, Islamic world order, some of them are based on a single empire, civilization, or state system. Some of them, like Islam, has multiple centers, a common community, but multiple points of centers. So regionalism in that sense is natural and inevitable. It's a fact of history. And where we might see, I'm not saying the world is getting fragmented into regions, but regionalism has been going around, led by European Union, ASEAN that we study, but also African Union, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And so my sense is that a multiplex world, which is the term I did not use because I don't want to get into arguments or questions about this. I want to focus on history. But the multi-civilization, multiplex world, which is my way of describing the coming world order, is a multi-civilizational and also multi-regional world. But these regions are not autarkic like spheres of influence. They are connected. So we have open regionalism. That's coming under some attack, but the United States, North America, may be pulling back on it a little bit under the United States, but the rest of the world is keeping regionalism going. Okay.
Oh, yeah. I'm very excited to read this book. And looking at the various periods of history and how things have changed, I'm wondering how you would see the potential destructiveness of like nuclear wars or nuclear applications, which could have centuries of implications for lasting, and how that might affect things, and also what potentially about AI and what applications that might figure in your changes. Thank you.
Can I pass this to you, Robbie? Because my book really ends before nuclear weapons are invented. I wanted to keep the focus deliberately on history because that's what I think the book will make a contribution. My next book, on the other hand, I was just talking to my agent in New York yesterday, could have some of this, but I have some ideas. But it'll be really good to hear from you guys. I mean, you deal with a lot of this.
Yeah, history is so much easier, and I'm more comfortable in that sense. More complicated, but gosh, I wish I had a good answer. I'll be quick. One of the critiques, actually, of focusing too much on history for hope, which is what many of us have looked to Amitav's book for, not just for hope, but for context, for understanding. One of the critiques is that so much has happened in the last 80 years. If you think of the forces of globalization and urbanization and technological shifts, you put all of that together, obviously the nuclear question, which is relatively new in historic terms, you add in AI. All of this feels so overwhelming and new and different that this is where history can actually feel inadequate in terms of providing clues or answers for how to navigate these things. I will say, and again, this is kind of a non-answer for you, but it does feel like the concept and idea of mutually assured destruction and deterrence is weaker today than it has been in a long time. And I think specifically with when Russia attacked Ukraine, most recently in 2022, the full-scale invasion, there were reports around the time in the fall of 2022 that Russia was considering the use of a tactical nuclear weapon. And there's, Akbar mentioned the Pakistan-Saudi Arabia pact in recent weeks. A lot of the way in which countries are now thinking about the nuclear issue is to rethink deterrence. When President Trump, for example, dangles the possibility of pulling out of NATO, things like that are making countries newly anxious about the nuclear question. And so I can completely imagine now countries beginning to either seek nukes where they didn't need to before, so think of South Korea or Japan, and I can imagine the creation of more pacts, like the Saudi-Pakistan one, where a country that does have access to nuclear weapons, its umbrella is kind of expanded to other countries in a way that feels newly urgent. So that space I imagine to be frothy alongside other spaces in our new kind of chaotic era. I don't think AI plays as much a role in the question of order. I feel like where AI has a bigger application is in two forms. One is extraction, so the grand race to use and acquire people's data. And the other is the geopolitics of data centers and the energy that goes into running data centers. The question underlining all of this is how much of this moment is a bubble. And so the players that are plowing money into it, does that actually end up being something that helps them dramatically, or does this bubble burst and then we look at the ruins of that in a different way? Anyway, I'll stop. I know there are many other questions, but yeah.
Yes, I do want to make a comment on this dangers of the nuclear confrontation and possibly exchange of strikes. The problem is not going to come from Russia and Ukraine or the Middle East. It'll come, if it comes, and I hope it does not come, but it'll come from South Asia, India and Pakistan, because this recent skirmish, war, whatever you like to call it, in May, came this close to an escalation of a nuclear full-scale exchange. And if you read the blood-curdling threats that are coming out of the capitals of South Asia, you realize that no lessons have been learned. To the great characteristic of human capabilities that they do not learn is Einstein again. They're making the same mistake again and again and expecting a different result. Because the dangers that President Trump takes credit for forcing a ceasefire on India and Pakistan, Pakistan has happily accepted, they've nominated him for the Nobel Prize. India has refused, and therefore I think they're suffering with the tariffs and things. I think, Ravi, they should be more tactful in terms of how they respond to President Trump. So you have a situation where the focus of the West is largely for Europe and the Middle East, and you have South Asia trembling on the precipice. Please take it seriously. That's 1.5 billion people, 1.5 billion, 1/4 of humanity. 2 nuclear powers almost went to war, and the heat has not gone down. The temperature has not gone down. Read the threats and counter threats that are coming out of South Asia. So I would say, yes, there's a great danger. I don't think the leaders are understanding that if there is a nuclear strike, number one, who are they going to kill? Because there are Hindus and Muslims on both sides. And there are very deep connections between these cultures, very deep connections in culture and history and so on. And Amitav has pointed this out in his chapters. The leaders have to understand how serious this could be, not only for South Asia, but for the global situation. And that's where global leaders, including, I give full marks to President Trump, because he's at least constantly talking about his achievement and forcing a ceasefire, but they have to take it more seriously and prevent anything like that happening. Thank you.
If I can quickly add, I know people are waiting. There have been, to me, the nuclear question is very important, but I also find in history many examples of countries pulling back from the brink, on the verge of a war, coming back from the brink. And war is relative. When you say total destruction, we now know nuclear weapons can not only destroy India, Pakistan, but the whole world, right? But in the ancient period, people also thought their idea of the world was limited. So that means the world being destroyed, meaning entire civilization or a nation being destroyed, and they pulled back from the brink. And I think India and Pakistan did the same thing. They realized the dangers. They were, unlike deterrence theories in the old days, that global south or non-proliferation theories that non-Western countries cannot manage nuclear weapons. They don't have rationality. We know that they have a lot more rationality than you can imagine. And this conflict could have been a lot worse, but for the fact that they realized the danger of it. And one other very quick point about history is that when you talk about the relevance of history, so much has changed, and how can we make use of history? I always believe that history doesn't repeat itself. History can be abused. But let me just tell you, let's say you are sitting in the Renaissance period, and you were thinking about how to develop art, how to develop even politics, Machiavelli and others. They went back to Greece and Rome, because so much has changed since the fall of the Roman Empire, fall of the Greeks. But the Europeans revived Greece and Rome as their ancestor, which they were actually technically not. So I think something similar, that history can be psychological, history can give you possibilities, history can make you optimist or pessimist. A lot of people use history to be pessimist. But I think we should know what the history is. What is the history that we read in our textbooks, undergraduate, or maybe in high school? What's the history that could be seen very differently? And that's this book is about. Yeah.
Okay, just a quick announcement. We're going to be, again, taking 2 questions at a time, just to ensure that as many people can have their questions answered as possible. Thank you.
Okay, my name is Ethan Berber. I actually taught here 20 years ago, and I've been adjunct at WCL and Georgetown Law and some other places. My question relates to actually Rome and a trip I took recently to Pompeii, which is one of the things that is striking about visiting Pompeii is that they educated the population as a whole. This is, basically even like working class people sent their kids to school. And your book and your discussion is largely focused in on elites who are writing treatises and whatnot. And I'm wondering whether your book, I haven't read it, and I will say I sent a text to my kids saying if they promised to read the book, I would send it to them on Amazon. But I'm wondering what the role is sort of on widespread education at the countries that you looked at.
Okay. Peter Kovac, a retired member of the Senior Foreign Service. My question is simple. In this media age where people are immersed in their own little media echo chambers, I would think any new iteration of the world order or a civilizational order would have to have as a component broadening identities. And I wonder what your ideas are for transcending this particular media moment we're in to broaden identities. Thank you.
Let's take a few questions because we have really 6 minutes left, and we can all try to answer. Melissa, okay?
Cool. Hi, Owen Thompson, SIS senior here, and I was just wondering, how would you square the rise of the global South and the relative fall of the West with rising authoritarianism and general democratic backsliding around the world? Would you attribute any of these as like co-opting factors, or how would you just touch on that, I guess?
Hi, I'm Boaz Atzili, a professor here. So I think one of the greatest, maybe the great contribution of this book is not only making the argument, but very well documenting the fact that so many of the components of the world order, the ideas that under the world order that we have now, are not actually originated from the West, and they come from many different places, many different times. My question is, to what extent do people, and especially elites in the South, actually internalize the myth that the liberal world order is originally and still based on ideas from the West? That is, for example, when when Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, Vladimir Putin said that we should not abide by Western norms like territorial integrity because these are not our norms. Even though territorial integrity actually is not built on Western ideas, it's built on other parts of the world ideas. So so I guess the question is there a risk for the global South when it rises to throw the bathwater with the baby in terms of like taking also good ideas that are part of the liberal world orders and throw them away because they are Western?
Hi, Matt Kavanaugh from Georgetown University. I have only made it through a few of your 450 pages, but brilliant and really appreciate the insights. My question is about the kind of technology of governance today and how that compares. I mean, I take your point, and I think it's really clear that there is hope in looking at what has come and gone. But most of what's in your book, from what I can tell, is mostly things that collapsed and went away. We seem to now have a moment where we are seeing things, the institutions of the United Nations, et cetera, that claim globalism in a way that is perhaps not accurate, as you say, but at least they claim a global presence, and we seem to just layer on top. And so we end up with the United Nations and ASEAN and the AU and the G20 and. And so do you think history tells us that at some point we will see a kind of a limitation of that will reach a certain level at which we can't go forward? Or do you think we're in a different era given that kind of technology of governance? Thanks.
I'm Louis Goodman, professor here in the School of International Service, and I want to push my friend Amitav to talk a bit about the contemporary and future world. In other writings, you've used Barry Buzan's concept of interaction capacity, and you talked about how nations can increase their interaction capacity and then create this kind of global bazaar that you talked about. And the question was raised earlier about AI. Can AI and other things increase this capacity for interaction capacity and building a better bazaar so we can be a bit more optimistic when we're also worried about nuclear catastrophe?
I'm Patrick McGee, and I appreciate your expertise and the focus on this important subject. I want to see if the panel had any thoughts on how factors like exploitable resources, climate change, and forced migration shape world order, both historically and in our time, and perhaps more distressingly going forward. Thank you.
As we're short on time, like, I challenge you to take all of that in and take it in, let's say, 3 to 4 minutes.
I think a lot of the questions could be answered by Akbar and Ravi, and now I see the wisdom of inviting Ravi, because I can only answer the historical questions. I promised myself. So there's so much on your plate that you've been writing about Global South. He wrote about Global South apart from editing. And Akbar, of course, would be very much person to talk about from a civilizational perspective, and especially at one point, the Islamic world had the greatest interaction capacity. They are the founders of globalization. No way, two way of looking at it. From Cordoba to, say, the North Africa, Mediterranean, Egypt, Indian Ocean, most of the major traders in the Indian Ocean are Muslims, including those from India and Indonesia. So talk about
you referred to Ibn Rushd.
Yeah.
Amitav, Ibn Rushd was quoted over 500 times by Saint Thomas Aquinas, the greatest scholar saint of the Catholic Church, and by Maimonides, the greatest rabbi of the Middle Ages. So there wasn't this concept of East and West and
Use the
us and
microphone.
them. It was exactly, it was not a world divided between East and West and us and them. It was a world where ideas were appreciated. So Ibn Rushd is being quoted over 500 times by St. Thomas Aquinas, who calls him the commentator in his work. He doesn't even name him. He gives him so much respect, on the same level as Aristotle. That's the world that you refer to, and that's why you refer to Ibn Rushd in your work.
Okay, look, there's no way I can answer all of these questions, but what I'm going to try and make a point that might help us tie a bow on some of the things we've been discussing. You know, we've all discussed how we're entering a world of, well, we were in a world of chaos, but things look to be getting more chaotic. I want to add just a few more data points that will shift things or accelerate certain trends underway. Our last questioner brought up migration and climate change. Sir, there you are. Those forces, I think, are going to have a huge impact on questions of order and alliances and the regionalism that was brought up. There's a term called mini-lateralism. So if you think of like new alliances, we mentioned Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, but think of like I2U2, which is India, Israel, the UAE, which is the other U there, the USA, of course. AUKUS, Australia, United Kingdom, Australia. We're seeing nimble new mini groupings that are formed to deal with specific issues or problems. And the reason why I mention these two other big trends of climate change and migration is that they're going to overlay over a lot of our existing problems. If you look at population trends, so clear that Nigeria's population is going to double, triple in the next 50 odd years. That's an extra 400, 500 million people who are going to move northwards into Europe. And you can immediately see now we're entering an era not just of America first, but Europe first, and India first, and Israel first. So migratory pressures are going to play a huge role in how countries and regions see themselves, how they think about alliances, regionalism, and finally, world order. Same with climate change. Climate change is going to lead to a lot of these migratory movements, but to go back to the question that came up in the beginning about AI and the competition and the geopolitics for resources, basically, think of critical minerals. Think of how China basically in the month of May, China added new solar capacity that is more than the entire amount of electricity that Poland consumes in a year from all farms and all sources. That is the rate and scale of change that is coming our way, and that is going to change how countries interact with each other. So as the United States and China are locked in, a geopolitical struggle, which is really at the crux of why we're asking these questions of world order, when you have shifts at that level of energy creation, consumption, and then distribution, which other countries are now able to buy and use on the cheap, these are the other sort of overlaying things that I see as trend lines that are going to impact these bigger picture questions of world order, not only how we create order, but who gets to create it, who are the stakeholders, and what are the factors that matter to them. And so, again, I think it's fitting that my final point here is a non-answer, because we are in a world of more questions than answers. And I think that is going to be the place we will be at for the next several decades. And just to end, because we are all here for Amitav, this is the reason why history is important. This is the reason also why debate is important, because, again, the beauty of Amitav's book is that it runs counter to the prevalent narrative, that the fraying of the quote-unquote liberal rules-based order is going to be calamitous. This is the view that, for example, Robert Kagan in his book, The Return of the Jungle, great book, also think you should read that. But this is a corrective. This is arguing, in some senses, a different thing, that look to history for different examples, different ideas, possibilities. And I think that is going to be crucial as we think about how we frame questions of future order. Thank you, Amitav.
I know time, just maybe 1 or 2 minutes. A key point about authoritarianism and the rise of the global south. I actually would like to say and provoke you by saying that a lot of the action in the rise of authoritarianism is not in the global south today. Populism, the most virulent form of populism, combining absolute power and domestic populism, is happening not in the global south, to put it mildly. So global south always had authoritarian tendencies, and but it actually has done much better than the West has gone down on it. On the question of internalizing liberal order, Boaz's question, sorry. You know, it's the narrative of the liberal order that is seen as Western, and 100% blame goes to liberal order proponents, because as I have proven and so on, that many of these ideas, openness of seas, free trade, independence of states, humanitarian principles, they are actually global. But you have a narrative that says America invented all this or West invented all this. So you are creating the narrative that liberal order is Western, and therefore inviting criticism. That's what I tell to my very good friend John Eikenberry. We are inviting him to come here next semester. If you tell me that the liberal order emerged globally, I would be very happy to use the term liberal order. But if you say it basically was created by the United States, everybody was just following, you know, basically that's what he says. I'm not accepting it. So the narrative of the liberal order is wrongly done, but there is nothing wrong with the liberal order, and I've never said liberal order will disappear. It will be one of the orders, but it will have to compete with other forms of world order. So finally, it seems like we have done what I wanted to avoid. We have come back to the present. But on the other hand, it tells you that the book can be provocative when it comes to contemporary debates about world order. So thank you for my behalf. I'll leave it to our MCs.
Thank you, Amitav. And with that, like Western dominance, our time has relatively declined. And we invite you to have a copy of the book and enjoy some food outside. Thank you for coming.